Good morning. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Thelma Barker, President of the Independent Telecommunications Pioneers Association. Also, Director of Federal Sales, the Defense Sector at Comcast Government Services. ITPA proudly presents today's inaugural TIC 3.0 panel discussion as part of our ongoing monthly virtual series. A little bit about ITPA NCC. The Independent Telecommunications Pioneers Association is a nonprofit professional association created by and for the telecommunications industry. Dedicated to community service, ITPA has been serving the public on behalf of telecom companies since 1920. We are proudly celebrating our 100th year. Today's event is part of ITPA's ongoing and popular series of information exchange sessions, from in-person lunches to now remote sessions as part of our monthly virtual series. The ITPA National Capital Chapter, NCC, is proud of our long-standing tradition of supporting the Washington-Baltimore area USO, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and the National Capital Area Food Bank. Our local JRDF chapter helps support research to treating type 1 diabetes and the development of new treatments, provides a broad array of community and activist services to the type 1 diabetes population, and actively advocates for regulation favorable to medical research and approval of new and improved treatments. The Capital Area Food Bank is the largest Feeding America organization in the Washington metropolitan area, servicing the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. The organization helps provide food assistance to those in need. The Capital Area Food Bank works to combat food insecurity by addressing the underlying contributing factors by providing job training programs and healthcare services. Through these combined efforts, they're able to combat chronic undernutrition, heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. The USO of Metropolitan Washington-Baltimore is the largest chapter chartered by the USO, with a strong tradition of service in the National Capital Region. 9 locations and a deployable mobile USO provide signature USO services to the nearly 300,000 military members and their families living in the region. For our annual 2019 Christmas luncheon, we raised contribution funds from over 100 plus attendees for the USO Project ELF charity, which ensured that our military veterans and their families and children had a memorable Christmas. The USO's Project ELF is a signature USO Metro program through which companies, organizations, families, and the community at large register to sponsor a family by selecting and providing gifts selected from the child's custom wish list. ITPA NCC is thrilled to recognize the contributions and support of our platinum sponsors, Comcast Government Services, Granite Communications, Hughes, and Lumen. Our gold sponsors, Avaya, Converge One, Metel, Sus Consulting, and Verizon, as well as our silver sponsors, BJJ and Associates, Collab 9, Corning, Equinix, GBI, GES, and Turning Point Global Solutions. We are grateful for our ongoing sponsorship support and thrilled to have an array of new sponsors this season. A few quick items before we get started. We welcome our friends and colleagues from the media. As a reminder, today's sessions are all on the record. If you have a question, simply open the Q&A tab on your webinar toolbar and type in your question. I, as the MC, along with our Q&A panel moderator, Zain Ahmed, will work to include your questions in throughout the sessions. If you're having any technical difficulties, use the chat box in your toolbar to chat with the webinar host. And now, I'm pleased to introduce our fellow ITPA board member and Lumen's very own Eric Oakes. Eric is the Director of Sales for the Public Sector at Lumen Technologies and also serves as co-chair for our speaker committee. It is my privilege to introduce and send it over to Eric Oakes.
Thank you, Thelma, and thank you all for joining us for ITPA's TIC 3.0 panel discussion as part of ITPA's monthly virtual series. I'm thrilled to be a part of this history-making inaugural event. This is a huge step for us over here at ITPA as we look to navigate this post-COVID landscape, and we invite all of you to join us for our monthly series moving forward. Our thoughts and our well wishes go out to those affected by this global pandemic. As we shift toward a remote working hybrid setting, our security is a high priority as there remains an increase in cyber threats as more and more of us are working from home. Today, we are privileged to be able to host and discuss the current cybersecurity landscape with guest speakers from both CISA and GSA. Our first panelist, Sean Connelly, serves as the Trusted Internet Connections Program Manager at CISA within DHS. Our second panelist, Joseph Drummond, serves as the Senior IT Specialist for INFOSEC at CISA. And our third panelist, Jim Russo, is the Technical Director for the EIS Agency Modernization Program at GSA. Over to you, Mr. Russo, Mr. Connelly, and Mr. Drummond.
Thank you, Eric. Again, my name is Sean Connelly. I lead the TIC program at CISA. The TIC program, most of you know, Trusted Internet Connection, is OMB's policy, which we'll talk about, and the efforts across .gov to secure the modern architectures of today. Okay, so we're going to jump into the slide deck. So again, thank you to the IPTA team, Thelma and Eric, for the invitation. Also, for myself, just to let everyone know, I also have supported the CDM and E3A programs at CISA. In 2017, I was one of the authors of the IT Modernization Report to the President, and then more recently, the NIST Zero Trust Special Pub that came out. I was one of the co-authors of that. Next slide, please. So the agenda for today, I will begin with a quick overview of the TIC 3 updates. Then I'll pass the mic over to Mr. Drummond to discuss the National Cybersecurity Protection System and the updates there. And then batting cleanup is GSA's very own Jim Russo. Next slide, please. So we begin with a TIC 3 overview. Next slide, please. So we begin with the updates of TIC with the OMB memo 1926, released almost just over a year ago today. The memo itself lays out 3 different areas. It talks about the strategy, an update to the strategy, update to architectures, and update to visibility. So the strategy, before TIC 2 was that traditional castle and moat architecture. We'll talk about this a little bit. Exploring new opportunities for controlled expansion of the agency's perimeter. The architectures. The memo allows for alternative ways to define the agency's boundaries and perimeters. And that visibility, the situational awareness, the telemetry, both for the agency and for CISA. When you read through this document, you understand that shift from securing a single network boundary to distributed secure architecture is the most fundamental change in the updated policy. Begins that transition to multi-boundary and trust zones, allows guidance to be iterative and adaptive, allows the agency to have broader interpretation authorities, and rescinds the old OMB TIC memos. Next slide, please. So in July of this year, we released our final guidance. We released draft earlier this year, had a request for comments, and then in July, we released the final, what we call the core documents, the program guidebook, the reference architecture, and the security capabilities catalog. The guidebook outlines the direction of the program as laid out in the IT modernization, the OMB memo, gives the core updates to the program itself. The goals being move the architectures to allow for more boundary focused solutions. And the tone is different from prior TIC reference architectures, where it's more about the objective and the intent of securing the data. The reference architecture document defines the concepts that we use going forward, trust zones, policy enforcement points, the management plane. And third of the core documents is the security capabilities catalog. This is maps to what was Appendix B of the old reference architecture. This is the capabilities, listing out the capabilities and different ways to secure the data. Roughly, we have about, I think, 75 capabilities in the catalog in this time. And as we'll explain, as we update with new use cases, that catalog listing will increase. Next slide, please. So in April, when the telework surge happened, we were starting to hear from OMB, from agencies, from vendors. They need some guidance, just some interim telework guidance. Again, we released the draft guidance in December, but they need something to use now, back in April, to support these modern architectures. So we developed this in support of OMB's memo 2019 about asking agencies or letting agencies consider new alternatives, addresses the telework security changes. This is discusses some of the solutions and architectures that would be considered in line with the TIC guidance released in December. It's important to understand this telework guidance is not part of the core guidance itself. It's not part of that reference architecture, the program guidebook, or the capabilities. It's kind of a blend of a lot of that. But this was just an interim document that we put out to help agencies immediately as they move to that telework posture. The intent is we will retire this or sunset this guidance at the end of the year as we release a draft copy, the remote user use case. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are we doing? What is this update you may be hearing about, the evolving networks and security challenges? So on the left side, you see the traditional network security model, that castle and moat solution. It's been the same for the last 10, 15 years. You have the moat protecting all the data. The crown jewels are inside the castle. Security is built around protecting the crown jewels. In our case, maybe users trying to go out of that perimeter to surf the web, or when other public users are trying to access the agency's services, there may be vulnerabilities in place against bind, DNS, or send mail or something. But those are attacks from 10 years ago. We don't hear about those attacks as much anymore, mostly because a lot of those services are now offsite. They're not in those castles anymore. So OMB Memo 1926 reflects that the connection model has changed. Before, it was desktop and servers on LANs, fixed assets and fixed networks, to the last maybe 5 years or so, where it's less fixed assets on less fixed networks, laptops and on-prem Wi-Fi or such. But now it's entirely new platforms. It's in the cloud. Users are on mobile or tablets, or they're using virtual desktops. So it's not as much, again, the model where it was 10 years ago and how we can move forward. We're seeing the attacks shift at the same time. Adversaries are trying to get users to click on something. Maybe the adversaries created a fake social networking profile, or the adversary is sending a URL, a crafted URL, through a social messaging app. Or perhaps the adversaries just scanning the internet, the cloud-based internet services, looking for something that's misconfigured. The theme being the attackers are moving to where those traditional network security controls, that castle moat, those solutions were located. The theme being that the attacks are shifting to the new perimeter. Next slide, please. So this new guidance that we released, the TIC 3 guidance and architecture, this move toward micro-segmentation, away from macro-segmentation toward zero trust. I won't get into zero trust on this, but mentioned before that we've released this special pub in coordination with NIST. Implementing that zero trust architecture involves extensive planning, both in architecture and design phase. But this interim telework guidance that we release accommodates various architectures. It supports the traditional network architectures, moves toward microsegmentation, and ultimately more toward a virtual desktop and or a zero trust solution. Next slide, please. So all this guidance that we've released so far, this is where we show how the agencies can use the guidance. We have the use cases, which are going to come out, and I'll talk about them in a minute. The catalog that I mentioned with the 75 or so different capabilities in there now, and these overlays, all these documents are shepherded toward the agency's risk management framework. In the background, of course, the agency's using NIST 853 controls, the NIST cybersecurity framework, all the stuff together agencies can use as they build out their risk framework management and documentation. Next slide, please. So I mentioned use cases and these alternative architectures. So CISA, in close coordination both with GSA and OMB, are monitoring the industry trends to inform the development of future use cases, future architectures. Use cases may account for technological advancements, again, mentioning zero trust, or some other possibilities we'll show in a moment here. The change in attack pattern, as I mentioned before, the adversaries changing what they're doing to try to gain access to the data. We also recognize just the proliferation, the changing in the environment itself, cloud and mobile devices. So all of that accounts for what we're trying to do with presenting these new use cases. Next slide, please. So this slide shows our different phases, and just to orientate everyone, we're just about at where that green flag is between phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was all that core documents. I mentioned some of these before, the guidebook, the reference architecture, the catalog, the 2 handbooks there, they're smaller documents, but all those we've either positioned or positioning to release. We also are working with OMB, the Federal CISO Council, on releasing the 2 final use cases that in that phase 1, the traditional TIC use case and the branch office use case. Once that effort is complete, then we move toward phase 2. The OMB memo that I mentioned originally, there's other use cases laid out in there: remote user, infrastructure service, SaaS, PaaS, email. Those are all use cases where we are going to work with the CISO Council, with agencies, with vendors to develop use cases for adoption across the .gov community. That's phase 2. Then phase 3 is more long-term. We recognize the interest around zero trust. We recognize the interest toward an Internet of Things use case. So these are potential use cases that we're considering once we release that phase 2 set of use cases. Next slide, please. So all this that we just talked about, this is a fire hose of information in 10 minutes. You see the webinar there that Jim Russo's team at GSA hosted. We go through about an hour of going through all the documentation, how it works together. I suggest if you want more information to review that webinar itself. And then at the same time, the CISA, we have a website on the CISA, CISA.gov, Trusted Internet Connections, where all the material is. I mentioned all those documents before, the reference architecture, the guidebook, all that type of documentation is hosted on there. We also created an FAQ as common questions we have coming in. These questions answer some of what the discussions we're hearing both from the agencies themselves and industry. And with that, I'm going, next slide, please. I will pass the microphone over to Joseph Drummond. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. That's a really good picture. Where'd you guys get that from? Just kidding. Next slide. So today we'll be talking about basically CISA or NCPS's solution in being able to gather logs from a multitude of different sources. I know that Sean just talked about how TIC 3.0 kind of shifts the paradigm and offers departments and agencies an opportunity to leverage other technologies outside of the TIC and MTIPS services that are currently used today. Next slide. And so let me just say that in CIRA Volume 1, which is a document that talks about the different reporting patterns that can be used to present log data to the Cloud Log Aggregation Warehouse, which is the NCPS solution for gathering log data from cloud services. Next slide. And so, like I said earlier, as agencies do migrate to cloud environments, the cloud is a data-rich environment. Everything that you do produces a log that can be captured and from a cybersecurity standpoint, invaluable to what we at CISA do. And so, like in your usual traditional architecture, where there's a Einstein device sitting in a TIC or MTIPS location that captures net flow data, this is the CLAW, the Cloud Log Aggregation Warehouse, is a capability that we're piloting that will be able to collect E1-like data. And what I mean by that is whether you're in AWS and you're generating a VPC flow log, or you're leveraging a third-party cybersecurity service, where we want that data presented in the CLAW pilot, presented to the Cloud Log Aggregation Warehouse. And so we're evolving to meet the new landscape. So the NCPS sensor screen network traffic routed to and from agencies, like I said earlier, via TIC and MTIPS. And so now that organizations are leveraging cloud services, we're adapting to meet that. Next slide. So initially, the log types that we're focusing on are those flow logs, whether you're in an O365 environment or Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud. For the pilot, for the duration of the pilot, we're focusing on capturing those flow logs, or we kind of call them Einstein 1 equivalent logs that are native to cloud service providers. And so if you have your virtual private cloud environment and logs are being generated, or flow logs are being generated, that's the type of information or log data that we want presented to the CLAW. Next slide. So this slide basically goes over kind of how it'll work. So the log will be transmitted from the agency's cloud environment to the internet edge of the Cloud Log Aggregation Warehouse. As that data is tunneled in, it goes through an ingestion process, and it then resides in our data store, where it's given access to CISA analysts to be able to assess any threats that might be presented from that log data. And so in part, it's module based. And so ingest, store, and analyze security logs. Next slide. And like I said, this is the process. It's a first step. So one of the things that we've definitely been assessing throughout the program is, in such a data-rich environment, what are the types of logs that would be able to provide us the most value from a cyber threat perspective? And so the pilot, like I said, initially focuses on those flow-like logs, but as we do our analysis, the scope of it will grow. So, and the one thing I want to highlight, that the agency is responsible for configuring their cloud environment to collect the appropriate logs and make them available to CISA. And that's one difference I want to definitely touch on. So this is definitely a dynamic relationship between the department and agency and CISA, right? So, you know, the options for cloud service providers are multifaceted. The ways to present the data to CLAW will also has a multitude of options to meet that environment. And so that's something that we're also looking to assess in the pilot, not only the volume of data, also the type, in terms of whether it's coming from an AWS environment, a Microsoft environment, a third-party cybersecurity service. I don't want to mention any names, but there's a plethora of them out there. We want to make sure that the architecture that we're designing is flexible to meet the flexibility of the cybersecurity threat space, or landscape rather. Next slide. And so, and this highlights on that. So if you look at the slide from left to right, it starts with the traditional NCPS via the TIC, right? And so in the legend, the orange shows that what's in orange is primarily the responsibility of CISA. And so as you move to the right, and it shows that there's a shift from things that are the cloud service provider's responsibility, like procurement configuration is a mixture of both the CSP and the agency. And if you shift to the platform as a service, where a lot of that or all of it rather, is the CSP's primary responsibility, and configuration is a mixture between CSP and agency, and finally all the way to the right. It shows how that the relationship changes, how this has become a shared responsibility with cloud service provider, the agency, and CISA. And so, and that to me is the only way we're able to meet such a dynamic environment, by working together to be able to work with cloud service providers to provide ways to present logs or collect logs in their environment, work with the agencies to present those logs to CISA, and then CISA, of course, generating capability like the CLAW to analyze and assess the log data that's collected. Next slide. So this slide lays out kind of how that model would work, right? So you have two different regions. Currently, with one of the CLAW environment resides in one region, but we're looking at make it geographically dispersed to be able to decrease latency. And so we want to be able to meet you where you are, and leveraging the cloud's ability to do that was one of the reasons for pushing for this architecture in the first place. And so you have Cloud Region X, where that log data is pushed from the cloud environments of Agency 1 and 2 into CISA's Cloud Log Aggregation Warehouse, and eventually it's aggregated into our online data store where it can be analyzed and accessed by our analysts. Next slide. And so what this shows is that the agency data won't be mixed. That's one thing that we really wanted to make sure, because as departments and agencies are onboarded to this pilot, the data requirements for each agency data requirements are different for each agency. And so we want to ensure that everyone has an understanding that we are basically fitting what we do to your data to the needs of the organization. And so it's to prevent data commingling and corruption. Next slide. And so that's all that I have to say right now. One thing that I'm kind of excited about, the options that TIC 3.0 provides departments and agencies, and the way that CISA is trying to evolve to meet that changing landscape. So I definitely look forward for engaging on this topic in the future. I'm one of the co-leads of the Cloud Log Aggregation Warehouse project or pilot for CISA. Kyle Koval is the other. So please feel free to reach out.
Okay, thank you, JD. And I'm Jim Russo. I'll pick up the GSA baton here to finish out the formal presentation. So I like all these pictures that have me with hair. I have to come up with a couple more of those. Yeah, I've been involved with the EIS program for quite a while, as most of you know, and continue to support the program through current position within the Solutions Development Organization within our Office of Telecommunications Services. So, and EIS is always job one. So on to the next slide. All right, next slide. All right, so just wanted to point out that, we've had, a lot of times when we speak, and I speak with Sean, we talk about the partnership between GSA and CISA. And I just wanted to highlight here that it's more than just on the TIC program or on the CDM program, but we really do collaborate across the programs. Obviously, the slide showing you what acquisition vehicles we use to support CDM, TIC, and what Joe just talked about, the NCPS program. But we also do more than just provide the contracts. We do look across the contracts requirements, and for instance, we were able to find places where we were asking our MTIPS providers to provide us deliverables that the CDM program was already collecting. So we were able to eliminate some duplicate deliverables in that way. So yeah, it's just one example of how we try to work together on this. Next slide, please. Okay, so while we continue on job one within EIS, which is, as I think everybody knows, has transitioned from the previous contracts over to EIS. We've had a continuing focus on IT modernization, and this started as we wrote the RFP, and we called out, we laid the groundwork and the framework for areas that we knew were going to change in the future. For instance, we knew that the TIC guidance was going to modernize because agencies were moving to the cloud. We also knew the NCPS way of collecting data was going to evolve. And then further, things like mobility and cloud services would take a greater role. So we obviously structured the contract to accommodate those. We've done some work to kind of encapsulate sort of a stair step of modernization for agencies to follow, getting them basically guidance to move from legacy voice to IP-based voice. That sounds kind of basic, but it is a good first step for a lot of the agencies that still had legacy services. And likewise, going from TDM to Ethernet-based transport. And and MTIPS was sort of our one trick, our one size fits all to support all the cybersecurity requirements. And we really did try to lay a framework and have continued to lay a framework that emphasizes that it's not just MTIPS anymore. So there's some collateral out there that we've made available through our website, especially on the general modernization theme. And we've got several, I'll call them sort of synopses. They're basically one-page infographics on the modernization use cases you see on the slide, and also for software-defined wide area networking. They're up on our main EIS page, which is at www.gsa.gov/EIS, and it's prominently shown there and above the fold in that first page. We've also created an SD-WAN service guide, which is available to agencies as they go in and they use the EIS pricer, where all the service guides are located. So there's an SD-WAN guide there. And we've also developed, just very recently finished, an SD-WAN overview and ordering guide, which is almost like a white paper tutorial of what SD-WAN is. We really thought that would help the agencies that weren't quite up, didn't have the staffing, weren't fully staffed in their CIO shop, or didn't have the technical expertise to really understand what the technology is and how it can enable them to move forward in implementing things like modernized TIC and NCPS solutions. So that's another piece of collateral that we have. Next slide, please. Okay, so the diagram here, I've used this before, really does kind of emphasize the inner networking of the different technologies. And since this is a TIC presentation, I put TIC in the middle, but I could have put pretty much anything in the middle there, but since we're doing TIC. So it just shows the synergy between the different transport options. So as I said, you go to a more robust type of transport solution, faster, more capacity. You manage it with an SD-WAN type approach. It gives you access to the cloud in a more secure way. And it also lays the ability in place to start to look at more ways to modernize the network, to do segmentation, to start talking about zero trust architectures, and accommodate in a more holistic fashion mobility, instead of mobility being a bolt-on service. It can be more integrated with the enterprise, especially when it comes to the security solutions part of it. So move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so just nuts and bolts here to talk about how we've modernized the contract, the EIS services, since we've awarded the contract back in 2017. We very recently finished the SD-WAN service, so that is on every EIS provider's contract as of now. We also have allowed from the beginning, but now as the services are becoming more plentiful for third-party providers, those security services can be added through our cloud services, and our providers have the ability to quickly add those to the contract using our catalog capability that we have under cloud. And also managed security services uses a catalog approach for new and emerging technologies. We still have MTIPs, of course, and that is our plan there, and we've had continuing discussions with our providers, which is we really want MTIPs to be kind of the baseline defined as it was for the previous reference architecture, because we know that a lot of agencies during their transition kept their MTIPS requirement in place. So they needed that to make the jump from networks to EIS. And a lot of those agencies are now looking at, and they wrote it in their solicitations, they were open to modernizing that solution, but now they're actually looking more closely at, what can they do there? And we're starting to have conversations with agencies in terms of how they can move from the basic MTIPS forward to incorporate some of the guidance that CISA has put together and put out in the documents that Sean talked about earlier. Our approach is to, MTIPS can still be used to create that traditional TIC approach and add on additional services, either those cloud services I talked about, or we can use managed security services that are already on the contract and spelled out on the contract, such as our managed prevention service suite. We're also, and I'll probably talk about this in the next slide, but we're also looking at ways that we can continue to add and evolve our offerings. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the new offerings we're talking about are around the adding more transport options, and we're not really adding them. We're just really specifying them a little better. We're pointing out that yes, they are on the contract, and yes, you can buy them, and here's the coin to our agencies, and making it easier for industry to have sort of a template to follow to price these things. So one that we're working on now, and we've shared the draft already with our industry partners, is our broadband internet service that we're adding. In addition, we're about to pull the trigger on, and within the next week or so, we plan to get out the next draft modification to our providers to look at that will incorporate the next step in terms of providing a TIC service that's in line with the TIC 3 guidance that CISA is providing. So that, more tools in the toolkit, and when we're kind of laying out our outreach to agencies and in terms of helping them move from where they are today to where they want to go, we offer this basic plan here that's on the slide. It's not too much different than the approach we used for transition, or the approach that you might want to use if you're designing a zero trust network, or even any other type of thing like network as a service, where you first have to figure out what you've got, who your users are, who needs access, what access is critical and which is not for everyone, and you can segment the network appropriately. Best practices, the leverage. We really feel like there's a lot to be gained by the agencies paying attention to what their fellow and sister agencies are doing. There's pilots going on. There's and we generally like to leave it up to the agencies to sort of advertise what they're doing or not, depending on how public they want that to be. We know that Small Business Administration has been very public in what they've been doing over the last several years, and they've spoken with us, with this group before, with ITPA. So I think everybody's kind of well versed in what they're doing, but there's other agencies that are kicking the tires. They're looking at third-party offerings, and Joe mentioned some of the different providers that are coming to the table, willing to do testing, willing to do pilots. We know that our primes are willing to do those as well with agencies that they're working with. So there's a lot to be learned there, and there's a lot to be learned by sharing from agency to agency. And we're starting to get those calls too, and pointing some of the folks to, oh, have you seen what Interior is doing? Have you seen what state wants to do? Maybe they should talk. So that's one of the roles that GSA continues to have here. Obviously, the TIC guidance documents from CISA are continuing to come out and be updated, as Sean talked about. We've developed in GSA some templates for the agencies to use as they create their solicitations, or maybe now that they're looking at what they might want to do the next option year, what requirements, how they want to write them. And SD-WAN, especially, we gave the agencies different ways to approach how they might want to implement that. The service guide talks of that in pretty good depth, and so does the overview and ordering guide that I spoke about earlier. So it sort of gives an outline and steps and ways forward for agencies to follow as a good rule of thumb and a good approach. So our email address there for general questions, and as I said, we're open to calls from industry. We speak with different providers all the time, third parties, in addition to our existing primes. And I think the next slide is pretty much our contact list. Yes, it is. So with that, I think we've completed the formal part of the presentation here. I guess I'll throw it over to Zain, and we could commence with questions.
So
Sure.
before Zain comes up,
Go ahead, Thelma.
let me just thank Jim, JD, and Sean. Amazing presentation. And Jim, you could not have ended on a better note, stating that you all are open to calls from industry. Thank you. So now I'd like to welcome our Q&A panel moderator, Zain Ahmed, Regional Vice President, Federal Government at Lumen. Good morning and welcome, Zain.
Good morning. Thank you, Thelma. Appreciate it. Wow, you guys did a really good job, Jim, JD, Sean, kind of going through a very complicated and dynamic environment in such a structured manner. So appreciate you guys walking us through what's coming up, and there's a lot of new things coming around. We're getting questions, so I'll line it up. Maybe Jim, start with you, and others can join. How can industry participate and support TIC 3.0 initiative?
Okay, well, industry's already doing a lot of that. Some of it, as I said, maybe behind the curtain. I know that the pilots I talked about. Well, let me just try to frame it. There were pilots mentioned in the OMB memo, and a structured way to do pilots through the Federal CISO Council, get them approved and go forward with them. But I think there's some more informal testing, maybe I'll call it testing instead of pilots, that agencies are conducting. Either their own CIOs are looking at, testing the different tools separately, maybe in a controlled environment. They may want to test a Zscaler or a Palo Alto solution, or Cisco. I hate to even mention names because I'll leave somebody out, but we know that a lot of this is happening, and we also know that our EIS primes are working with the agencies that have reached out to them to allow them to say create a test bed or sandbox where some of these things can be tested. So that's certainly one way. Also for us, I think a way is to sort of communicate to us, when you hear things that are going on, you want to run ideas by us, maybe different ways to offer the services on the contract. We're going to do that in a structured way, obviously with TIC when we put out our draft modification information, so that the contract holders can comment and ask us questions about that. But we're open to more informal discussions as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in just a little bit, talking about the process that Jim mentioned for the Federal CISO Council. So on the TIC website I mentioned earlier at CISA.gov, there is a pilot process document that talks about this relationship that Jim was mentioning with the Federal CISO Council, OMB, GSA and the different stakeholders within CISA. But just at a high level, the pace, what's supposed to happen is the Federal CISO Council, and I'll just use an example for Zero Trust. Federal CISO Council wants agencies to submit proposals for a Zero Trust use case for TIC. So the council will give, let's just say 30 days to agencies to build proposals. We may have some templates or some basic questions for the agency who want to answer in their proposals. Agencies are free to talk to different vendors and partners, establish how they want to position their proposals. Those proposals will be submitted back to the Federal CISO Council. The Federal CISO Council will then go through, and there's a TIC subcommittee, that's what I'm really talking about here, the subcommittee of the council. But the subcommittee will go through the different proposals, and they'll select which ones best represent the intent of the use case. Then those agencies will work on those pilots. They may be in different phases of the pilot already in terms of acquisition and deployment, if it's a proof of concept or prototype or what have you. But anyway, from the GSA side, from the different stakeholders in GSA side, or CISA side, CDM, NCPS, ourselves, or analysts, we'll monitor that pilot. We'll distill lessons learned from those pilots. I should say pilots. There's going to be multiple agencies doing those pilots, and we'll be distilling those lessons learned from those pilots. Then from CISA side, in coordination with Jim's team and other teams within CISA, we will then draft a use case, and then that use case will be positioned to the Federal CISO Council for a thumbs up, if you will, and then adoption across.gov. And so the Jim was talking about before, that's the more formal way of how the vendors can get engaged with the agency or in these discussions with us.
Makes a lot of sense. Appreciate it. And maybe Sean, you can kind of answer this question. What challenges do you see in federal agencies face kind of in acquiring and adapting to the TIC 3.0 solutions, and what is the partnership with GSA and agencies to kind of move this forward?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. There's two broad ones I guess we could focus on. TIC 2 was much more, there's a compliance mechanism to it in terms of the agencies built out their physical TICs, agencies used MTIPs, and then those TICs themselves were validated, if you will, through various mechanisms. But that compliance structure has been positioned differently in TIC 3. TIC 3 is a lot more about the architecture. And so if you're building out a zero trust architecture, I'm not sure how do we build compliance around the architecture itself. You can distill it down to controls and capabilities, and this is what's talked about in the memo, where maybe through NCPS and through CDM, there could be some way to gain telemetry and gain visibility off of those controls at that very tactical level. But it's that, I mentioned this in the first couple slides, where the agency has a broader interpretation authority. So here's these use cases coming out, these different architectures, and then the agencies can interpret them and implement them and tailor those use cases to what works for their different environments. So I think that's the first thing. I think just also the cultural change is just where the difference is, especially when you start moving towards zero trust, getting away from that physical network. Recognize I'm talking IPTA crowd. It's still important, right? Still there, but the services are abstracted away from the underlying network. And just not only just that understanding, well, all that means internally to the agencies with their risk management team and understand what that means for them going forward. I think those are the two pressing challenges we see. Zain, you on mute, or is it just me?
Sorry, JD, would you like to add anything around this? Anything around cloud, how things are shaping out there?
Well, I definitely want to echo what Sean just said. I think we're going to see agencies dealing with the plethora of options out there when it comes to TIC 3.0, and also presenting, and it's definitely not a validation kind of thing, like, you know, like in the past, oh, I'm TIC compliant because I'm leveraging TIC infrastructure. And so compliance is not, we're not in the compliance business, but I'm thinking that being able at the tactical or operational level to present log data to CISA via CLAW and other capabilities from CDM, et cetera, would be a way of kind of, I guess, circling the block, if you will. So you're moving to TIC 3.0, you're still in compliance with legal and policy guidance by presenting cybersecurity telemetry log data back to CISA. And so that might be a way that moving forward, the new model will look like to a certain degree. So, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And as we engage with industry and other departments and agencies to kind of lay that out, it'll be interesting to see what that morphs into.
Thanks,
Yeah, I'll sort of tack on here to what JD and Sean have said, just from the acquisition perspective. So, before we had it easy because we had MTIPs. MTIPs had CLINs. It was one size fits all, or fits most, and like it or hate it, it was pretty well defined, and it was pretty much the same for every agency that wanted to use it. Whereas in this case, there really is a lot more collaboration that's going to take place from the agency side in terms of the compliance really is, does the industry solution meet the agency's requirements? And so it's been a test of the innovative acquisition tools we put into EIS to make this happen. But we really are going to draw very highly on our catalog services that we put in place for cloud and managed security services, and the use of the agency's task order unique CLINs that they would put together with specific requirements for their environments that really just work for them. It's tailored to them, as I think JD said. So it's not one size fits all, and it is flexible. And there are many ways to put it together. There's a lot of variables. So the whole compliance thing, just to wrap the circle together, is really coming back to, is industry providing what the agency asked for, and is the agency asking for things within the TIC 3 guidelines and the NCPS guidelines that Sean and JD are talking about.
That's a good entree into the next question. So Jim, probably you could start here, and others can add any insight they might have. How does network modernization connect to the government's broader IT modernization effort, and will the network modernization lead to a more secure network?
Well, we certainly hope network modernization leads to a more secure network. I think it allows you to incorporate such tools and capabilities that SD-WAN and Zero Trust eventually will give us. You just couldn't do if you're just putting together, like a hub and spoke network with individual circuits like we used to. Really the wild card there a little bit is what the cloud service providers can natively provide in terms of security. And, actually, I'm not going to speak for Sean and JD, but I have been pretty impressed with what I'm seeing from cloud service providers in that area. They do have a lot of things that they can bring to the table, and we need to incorporate those. So the initial modernization, as I said, was really the walk before crawl stage, which is, hey, you can't do any of this if you're still writing TDM circuits. You've got to at least modernize, go IP, go Ethernet, get all that in place, and then you're enabled to do what we're talking about, modernizing your network and different and better ways of managing it, and then layering the cybersecurity in as you do it, instead of just bolting it in after you create your network.
Makes sense. Any additional insight from Sean or JD?
Yeah, I'll just say, if you follow the Gartner, the SASE model, right, that secure access service edge, and a lot of what Jim's talked about is what we're looking at is, as that data is more shifted toward that edge, it's then how do we put security around the data when it's there. And so JD before was talking about how CISA, we are moving some of our services closer to where their data is and trying to get our security closer to how the data is being produced itself. And again, it's part of that network modernization in general. I think that's how we're helping to support it.
Makes sense. And last question, how will EIS evolve with updates to stay current with CISA guidance and industry innovation? And probably Jim, you'd be the first person to start there.
Yeah, since you guys said GSA, I guess I'm stuck with this. Well, anyway, You know, first of all, I talked a little bit about that through our mods in our strategic modification plan. We'll continue. We're trying to run along as quickly as we can astride what CISA is doing. We don't want that guidance to be out there and then we sit back and say, oh, now we have to modernize the contract. No, we've been doing that sort of in parallel, which is the real point of doing this TIC service mod now, in concert with those use cases being updated. And so hopefully we both reach, a liftoff at approximately the same time on that. But we've tried to make our approach generic to fit where we see the use cases going. As things evolve, and if it turns out that there's kind of a standard set of requirements that kind of shake out of all this, maybe standard solution modules, I'll call them, then those are things we look at, more, I don't even want to use the word, but I can't think of a better one, so I'll use it. Commoditize it, and actually clean it on the contract. But I actually don't think we're going to get there. I think the evolution is going to just keep moving too fast, and there'll be so many variables between agency missions that we probably would do a disservice to ourselves by trying to do that. I think we need to be more flexible and just use all the tools in the contract toolkit as best we can, and kind of look back to that, really where the rubber meets the road is, does the solution meet the requirement that the agencies have?
I think, one thing to add on, and I really didn't discuss this too much in the presentation. Again, there's a fire hose as it was, but there's one thing we talked about briefly called the overlays. These are the vendor overlays, and these are a work in progress for us. We're really just beginning to understand the potential of these. And the overlays are where the vendors are free to map their capabilities to those TIC capabilities. I'm sorry, the vendor services to the TIC capabilities. There's already a draft overlay handbook out there. We're going to release a updated version of that. The interim telework guidance that we released before, and I think in the security catalog, at the end of the catalog, I'll use that one. There's an appendix that has this table, and the vendors can use that table and build out an overlay so the agencies can then understand what services are available to map to the TIC capabilities. And again, I mentioned this is a work in progress. So we may then use those overlays for something on the CDM side of the house in terms of understanding what we may look at from the CDM side in terms of monitoring the agency's environment. NCPS may want to leverage some of this in terms of telemetry that you want to gain out of the environments themselves. You've heard a little about CISA or CISA's QSMO. They may want to position some of this with their security services, tightly coupled with what Jim's doing over EIS. Jim mentioned the pace of the services that are coming out from the vendors. Vendors are putting out services so fast. We recognize the challenge of us trying to put a lot of structure around them. So we put the emphasis on the vendors that they're the ones responsible for mapping these capabilities and show everyone how these map. And then we'll use those overlays going forward. So again, they're a work in progress, but I think that's one area where really we look for some potential engagement with the vendors.
I agree. It provides a good operational framework in trying to work with industry and agencies and us to be able to we're not trying to box them into a solution, but provide a framework that they can look towards. And so I know when I started with CISA, I was fresh from grad school. My research was in software-defined networking. And from the time the IT modernization came on, and then governments and agencies leveraging all these new services and thus adapting to it, to me, goes a little bit faster than folks give the government credit for. So I think I'm excited to see where this is going.
Great. Thank you to the panelists. Appreciate you guys taking time and answering all these questions. It's been really informative and collaborative discussion between GSA and CISA. It doesn't happen in a vacuum, so appreciate the communication you guys are keeping with industry as well. I'll turn it over to Thelma.
Thank you, Zain. In light of the real-time challenges, the fast-moving landscape, and the complex and growing cyber threat, this has certainly been an abundance of valuable information today, and I'd like to thank all of you. Please join me in a resounding round of applause, and thank you to our expert panelists, Sean Connelly, James Drummond, and Jim Russo, and to our distinguished event and Q&A panel moderators, Eric Oakes and Zain Ahmed. As you'll see, we're about to close out our day, and in this next slide, this year marks the 10th consecutive year that the ITPA NCC will hold our annual golf tournament at the Army-Navy Country Club in Fairfax, Virginia. We are proud of our long-standing tradition of supporting the Salute Military Golf Association. The SMGA's mission is to provide rehabilitative golf programs, experiences, and family-inclusive golf opportunities for post-9/11 wounded war veterans in an effort to improve the quality of life for these American heroes. Eligible veterans and service members include those wounded or injured in post-9/11 military operations, including those with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. Mark your calendar for ITPA's annual golf tournament on Monday, November 2nd. For more information, reach out to us by emailing us at info@itpancc.org. A special thank you again to our platinum sponsors, Comcast, Granite, Hughes, and Lumen. Our gold sponsors, Avaya, Converge One, Metel, Sus Consulting, GBI, Verizon, as well as our silver sponsors, BJJ and Associates, Collab 9, Corning, Equinix, GBI, GES, and Turning Point Global Solutions. Welcome and much appreciation goes out to our new sponsors this season. Lastly, thank you again to our speakers, sponsors, and all of our special attendees. ITPA NCC will continue to hold an array of events as part of our monthly virtual series throughout 2020 and 2021. Feel free to email us at info@itpancc.org for a copy of today's slide presentation. Follow us on social media for updates on all of the latest program developments. We will give you a few minutes back to your busy schedules today. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe and have an amazing day.